Hey guys, welcome back. It's Jake here, and in this tutorial we're going to be making our enemies automated, coming in by themselves basically and spawning by themselves. Now if you guys remember last tutorial, we created, I'll go back here for a sec. As you can see, I made the font size, hopefully you can see, I made the font size a little bigger so some of you guys can see a bit better. It works best in full screen 1080p on the YouTube settings, but I don't know, for some people that watch on their iPods, I know I watch YouTube videos on my phone, well, sometimes when I don't have a computer around, so yeah, it needs to be a little bigger, and that's why I made it a little bigger, the text. Okay, so what I was talking about was, we created some functions. We created spawn enemy and draw all enemies, so now the enemies draw, no matter how many there are, and if you guys remember, if you type in spawn enemy in the console and type in any number, so I'm going to type in 20, it's going to spawn 20 enemies, and they're going to fly in random. They're going to spawn over here randomly and fly in by themselves. Now we want this to be automated, and that is what we're going to do this tutorial. So let's go back to our code. And actually, on a side note, first thing I want to do is, you know how we have var jet1 up here, and then in our init function jet1 equals new jet. What I'm going to do is actually take this out of here, because there's no sense in defining it a second time when it could be defined in one line up here. So that's what I'm going to do, guys. Just plain old var jet1 equals new jet. That means there's nothing left in our init for the jet1 thing. So perfect. So that's all we have, and that's the only little change that I've got. I know I make some changes throughout this series, just because I think the changes are not necessary. Well, they are necessary to me, but because I don't know, I just like to make little changes to make things as good as they possibly can be, as much as I try. Anyways, so this tutorial, let's create an automated spawning enemy. Now, in our first couple of tutorials in the series, we had a draw interval instead of request animation frame. Our draw interval was basically an interval that says draw every this amount of milliseconds. That is basically what our automated enemy spawner will do. It's going to spawn an enemy every certain amount of milliseconds. So to start off, what we need is to define a new function, and let's put it in the main functions area. I'm going to put it below draw all enemies. So function start spawning enemies. Whoops. Enemies. Okay, so this is our basic function. Inside of this function, we're going to need two lines. I'll start with the second line though. Spawn interval. And actually, if you guys remember, one of our new variables up here is called spawn interval. And we just describe it up here with var, so the program knows that we're going to use spawn interval somewhere in our game. And this is actually where we're going to use it right here. So in our start spawning enemies, we want our spawn interval to start up. So we're going to say set spawn interval equal to set interval. It basically defines a new interval. And semicolon at the end. Inside of here, we want to put spawn enemy, and then a comma, spawn amount. Now, this isn't fully true. I'm going to explain it a bit. Basically, set interval, we give it a function name to call, oops, this should not be spawn amount. Sorry, spawn rate. That's what we want. Okay, so set interval. Basically, this little thing right here calls a function, spawn enemy right here, every certain amount of milliseconds, which is our spawn rate variable up here, which we have set at 2000 milliseconds right now. So, now, at the beginning of our series, we had a draw interval, and we had just one name here, draw. The thing is, though, spawn enemy, the function itself, has a parameter, n. N stands for number of enemies that we want to spawn. Now, when we have an interval that we have to set up, we cannot, well, I don't know if you can, you're not supposed to though, it's very bad programming in JavaScript if you put in a number like that. This is fine if you call this somewhere else. So this, sorry, I was just talking to someone. Anyways, so this is totally fine if you go like that. Spawn enemy, parameter 5. That's basically calling the spawn enemy function and telling it to spawn 5 enemies. However, when you have something like set interval or something similar where you have a function inside of brackets already, you shouldn't, that I know of, well, I know you cannot, you should not at least, put a number like that in there. However, to do that, we need to tell spawn enemy how many enemies we want to spawn. The way to do that is by defining a function that, an anonymous function, I believe is what it's called. Basically, the function has no name. It just calls automatically inside of here. So basically, what we're doing, this looks kind of weird how I'm setting it up. But basically, I just defined an anonymous function, I believe it's called, inside of set interval. Basically, set interval will call function. You don't even have to worry about this part. This is just saying that it's a new function we're creating in here. And this is the function code that we want to make happen. Basically, spawn enemy, we're setting it to spawn 5 enemies. And I think I had this right. No, I've got it wrong. Semicolon should be inside this curly bracket. Basically, spawn interval is going to become an interval. It's going to call spawn enemy every this many milliseconds, which is our spawn rate, which is 2,000 milliseconds. Spawn enemy. Now, we can have this as 5. Basically, it's going to spawn 5 enemies every 2,000 milliseconds. What we can do instead is put in our variable spawn amount in here. Now, our spawn amount variable is right now set to 2. The point is, though, say we want to change how many enemies we want to start spawning. It's kind of hard to go, well, say the game's midway playing. You're playing the game through, and all of a sudden, oh, I want to slow down or make more enemies spawn than what is already spawning. Basically, all we have to do is change spawn amount, the variable itself, and automatically that will change how many enemies will be spawning. That's the easier way to do it, because otherwise, if you just put a plain number instead of spawn amount, you basically have to redefine this whole line again somewhere in your code, because it's just like that. Well, that's not really explaining, but you know what I mean. Spawn amount. If you have a variable, it's very, very easy to change a variable compared to changing a whole line when you want to make something happen. So that's why we have the spawn amount variable. Basically, we're telling spawn amount set to 2 and spawn rate set to 2,000. We're telling the game to spawn enemy, spawn 2 enemies every 2,000 milliseconds. That's what this line does. And it's going to keep going every 2,000 milliseconds. Now, the second function that we need is function stop spawning enemies. And this function basically, when we want our enemies to stop spawning, we will call this function. This function, all it does is we type in clear interval, 2 brackets and a semicolon. And inside the clear interval, all we do is our interval name, which is spawn interval. Basically, that's all we need for this little function right here. Stop spawning enemies. We will clear this interval, basically set it to nothing, or just stop. It'll stop the interval from occurring again. That's all that function does. Now, just to be safe, say if you are playing the game, like it's midway through the game, and you're spawning enemies already. For some reason, you call start spawning enemies again, whether it be on purpose or by accident. If you call start spawning enemies twice, it's going to make this spawn interval call twice. And basically, that is doubling how many enemies will come out, and is doubling the amount of time it takes them to come, halving the amount of time it takes to come out for them to spawn, So a workaround that is basically before you set your interval again, go stop spawning enemies. And that's how it works. Now, I'm going to explain this a bit more because I know it seems really confusing. So I'm going to comment that line out. And I'm going to go into our game. I'm going to refresh the page. Now, I'm going to press start spawning enemies. And I'm going to call this function. Let's see what happens here. Oh, there we go. So, I think it's spawning 2 enemies every... Okay, let's speed it up. Whoa. Okay, that's normal. It's just that they're spawning it randomly. So, start spawning enemies, like I said. It spawns 2 enemies every 2,000 milliseconds. So if we go back in our code and I say stop spawning enemies, basically it's going to stop the spawning from occurring. So after a couple seconds, no more enemies will spawn. I'm hoping. Yeah, I'm right. No more enemies are spawning. That's perfect. That's what we want to do. Now, say we go start spawning enemies. It's going to start the spawner, I guess we can call it. It's going to start the spawner up again. Every 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds, there's going to be 2 new enemy jets created. Now, say I call start spawning enemies again a second time. I have it once here, and I'm calling it again right after. I believe it's going to double it up, which is not what we want. It's kind of hard to tell. Definitely is hard to tell. But basically, guys, even if this doesn't really show it, this stop spawning enemies right here, by putting it inside the start spawning enemies, basically we're telling the interval to clear before we reset the interval. This just makes sure that nothing can go wrong with this interval. It's not going to call twice by accident. We're just double checking to make sure it's not going to happen like that. So, our enemy spawner, let me just say this. Our enemy spawner is now working properly. What we need to do to make it start right off the bat is inside of our init function, what we're going to do is after start loop, we're going to put in, you know what? I've got a better spot. In our start loop function, what we're going to do is after loop, we're going to type in start spawning enemies. Basically, when our game starts, when our drawing starts, we're going to start spawning the enemies. Now, stop loop, if our game stops, which we haven't really used this yet, I don't think, we're going to say stop spawning enemies. Just so it keeps in sync with the game drawing and how it goes. But guys, if we refresh the page, we are going to get 2 enemies spawned every 2 seconds, or 2,000 milliseconds. So I just refreshed the page, and here we go. Just like that. Now, what I meant about the spawn amount in this line right here, spawn amount, and if we just had a number there, it'd spawn that number over and over again. The thing with this is, though, if we change spawn amount to a larger number, I'm going to type in 30. It's going to spawn 30 jets every 2,000 milliseconds, and I'm going to press enter. And watch it pile on. Oh yeah. See what I mean? More jets. So if I go spawn amount, I'm going to type in 300 this time. It's going to get crazy. Yeah, you can see that. That's pretty crazy. Now if I go back and put spawn amount back to 1. Oh, I forgot the equal sign. Whoops. Let's spell it right. Spawn amount equals 1. We're going to see that it's going to spawn 1 enemy every 2,000 milliseconds, which will be very soon. There we go. That was just a huge amount of 300 enemies. But perfect. We have 1 enemy spawning every 2 seconds, basically. And guys, that's about it. We have an automated enemy spawner now. And so if you guys like this tutorial, press the like button. Next tutorial, we are going to be making... Oh, that's what I meant to do. Next tutorial, basically, if we type in our enemy list right here, enemies I think it is. Nope, wrong one, just enemy. Oh, it was enemies. Type in enemies. It's going to give us a list of every single enemy in our game right now. Basically, we spawn 300 enemies every 2,000 milliseconds. That's why this is so jam-packed of enemies. Now, when enemies get past this point, we're going to tell the program to delete those enemies. Because right now the program is drawing every single one of these enemies, even if they're off screen. And that's a waste of computer power. And that'll just slow the game down. So that's what we're going to do in the next tutorial. We're going to make the game delete these enemies as soon as they get past this point so that they don't slow down our game. So thanks for watching, guys. If you have any problems, leave a comment or send me a message. Thanks for watching.